Hello and welcome to Lesson 20 of Learning New Testament Greek. This lesson carries on from the previous 19 lessons, of course, but I hope it would also be of benefit to people who perhaps haven't worked their way through all my previous lessons, but students who are at about intermediate level, I'm sure would find these lessons helpful. In the previous 19 lessons, we looked at each lesson took an extract from the Greek New Testament. We haven't used any made-up exercises, and the last 8 or 10 lessons have seen us working steadily through the prologue to John's Gospel. That's John chapter 1 verse 1 to 18, and this lesson and the 3 following it will work our way through to the end of John chapter 1. And we've chosen John's Gospel not only because of the value of it, or the spiritual value of it, but also because the Greek of John's Gospel is relatively simple compared to other parts of the New Testament, and so it's suitable for people learning Greek to work on. But here I'll just reiterate some of the principles that we follow in this course. One is we avoid technical grammatical terminology as much as possible. And so we just explain things in simple terms as much as we can. And a second and important point is we don't learn vocabulary lists. And the reason for this is that vocabulary lists, which would give Greek word, English meaning, Greek word, English meaning, Greek word, English meaning, or maybe cards, people use vocabulary cards, they can be misleading because they're giving the Greek word and one English meaning, which of course can never properly describe the meaning area of the Greek word, because every word in every language has a whole meaning area. So the Greek word has its meaning area and the English word has its meaning area, and the overlap between the two might be quite small, and it will never be complete and perfect. So that's why I prefer to say, instead of this Greek word means this, we say that here's a first approximation. And the first approximation may work in a lot of cases. For example, with agape love, that's a pretty good approximation, but it is an approximation, and we shouldn't expect it to work in every context. And I find a lot of people go wrong like that because they've learnt the vocabulary list. Agape is love, and so when you translate it with a different word, they're upset and they think you've made a mistake because agape means love. But in fact it doesn't. Love is the first approximation to agape, and the same for every word. We could use an analogy. It's a bit like butterflies. So if the words are like butterflies, when they're flying free, you can see them in their natural context and you can study them and you can learn about them. But if you catch the butterfly and pin it to a card, the butterfly is dead. So you're not really seeing it as it really is. So that's why I say learn these words in their natural context. Let them fly in their natural context. And instead of using your memory space to learn vocabulary lists, use your memory space to learn real Greek. And real Greek straight from the New Testament. Like I say, we don't use any made-up exercises in these lessons. Everything that we do right from lesson 1 is taken directly and unchanged from the Greek New Testament. And so there is value not only from the point of view of learning a language, which is good mental exercise, but there's also value in that you're learning real scripture at the same time, and you're learning it in the exact original words that John and the other apostles wrote nearly 2,000 years ago. So here we are, John chapter 1 verse 19. Kai haute estin he marturia tu Ioannu, hote apestelan prosauton ho Judaioi ex Hierosolumon, hieres kai levitas ina erotesosin auton su tis e. And this is a typical Hebrew style to begin with an and. That's why You find in the King James Bible and other literal type Bibles that a lot of sentences in the Bible begin with and. It's Hebrew style, copied into Greek by the writers of the New Testament, who are of course native speakers of Hebrew, and Aramaic, which is similar, although the Aramaic style tends to be not to use this so much, but to use other joiners. And we see at the beginning of verse 22 there's an that's really joined by the second word and there's no kai. But we do see kai beginning verse 19 and beginning verse 20 as well, joining. And in English style, we would probably omit them, and we would just say, this is the testimony of John, and omit the and. So yes, John, as we commented before in an earlier lesson, John isn't called John the Baptist in this Gospel, but he's just called John. And this is consistent with this Gospel being written by a self-effacing man whose own name was John, but who refused to name himself. And he just reserves the name Ioannos, John, for John the Baptist. So, marturia testimony to Ioannou of John, hote apostellan, when they sent. So this here tells us that it's past tense. The normal form of this verb would be apostello, but the in here tells us that the O has been changed to an and that tells us that it's past tense. And this ending indicates they. So that one there is past, telling us that it's past tense, and this here is telling us that it's they. So they sent pros auton, to him. Now this is in square brackets because it's found in some of the ancient manuscripts but not others, and it's a bit of a toss-up really whether it should be included or not. It's hard to tell what John actually wrote, whether he wrote those words or not, so they've just been included there in the square brackets. Hoi Judaioi, the Jews. Now this is interesting, typical Hebrew word order, verb first and then the subject. In English, of course, nearly always we have the subject and then the verb, when the Jews sent to him. But this is typical Bible order influenced by Hebrew. They sent to him the Jews. So in English we'd have to say the Jews sent to him. But their order puts the subject after those things. So there we have it. And of course John's father was a priest, and so the priests would have been especially interested to learn about him. Ex Hierosolumon, from Jerusalem, priests and Levites. So the Levites were the priests' assistants. So the Jews, in this case of course meaning the Jewish leaders, from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites, hina, in order to erotesusin, in order that they might ask, in order to ask him. It actually says in order that they might ask or should ask him. Su tis a, you who are. So in English we would have to say, who are you? Who are you exactly? So this was their question. Now we're just going to use our convenient dictionary in the back of our Greek New Testament to check on this word here, because there's an interesting point to make about it. Just notice that these two words begin with the same few letters. Here the apostrophe going this way indicates that an H sound is brought in. Hierosolumon, hieres. So what's happened here is that the name of Jerusalem has been deliberately changed just a little to conform to this word here. In fact, the root, which means holy, so the holy men from the holy city. That's why they've put a h sound beginning it here to make the name of the city sound like Holy Solomon, Hieros Solomon, Hieres. So let's just look that up in our lexicon, dictionary that we have with the New Testament. So here we have this is what has been called the most valuable book in the world, the Greek New Testament. And this is the 5th revised edition with dictionary, and the dictionary is a critical part of it, bound on the back, which is very convenient. So here are the editors, and it's prepared by the Institute for New Testament Textual Research, and it's published by these organizations, and this is mostly prepared for Bible translators and for students, but now it incorporates the very latest up-to-date studies in textual research. The basic problem is that we have like 5,000 ancient manuscripts in Greek of the New Testament, and although they are pretty much agree, there are a few places, some of them reasonably significant, where they don't agree, and so there's quite a job for scholars to collate all these texts and then to use various methods to decide which is most likely to have been written by John and Matthew, Mark, and so on. And this is ongoing research as new manuscripts are discovered and further research is done and new techniques and methods are developed, and this represents the state of the art in doing that. So this is a very valuable book, and as I said, the value of it is enhanced by having this little dictionary bound right at the back of it, to which I refer frequently, a concise Greek-English dictionary of the New Testament, revised edition, prepared by Barclay M. Newman. And this dictionary is very good because it gives concise definitions of every word found in the Greek New Testament, and the meaning that it gives first is always the most common one. So here we have hieros, means sacred or holy, and Hierosoluma, Jerusalem. So as I said, we can see how the name of the city has been made to conform to this word holy. So it's like it's saying Holy Salem or something like that. And this is the form of the word Jerusalem that's used in John's Gospel, Hierosoluma, but in Revelation he uses Jerusalem, where there's no longer the H at the beginning of it. The little apostrophe, it might be too hard to see in the camera because it's very small. The little apostrophe goes back the other way, indicating that no H is drawn in. This one with the apostrophe going this way indicates an H comes in, and we pronounce it Hierosoluma. So this, if you like, is the form made into Greek and made to conform with the Greek word, seen as significant. But here is a form of it that more closely conforms to the Hebrew form, and this is the one that John uses in the book of Revelation. So the interesting thing about this is it seems that he uses the Greek form of the name whenever he's referring to the bricks and mortar city, but when he's referring to the ideal Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, he uses the Hebrew form, Jerusalem. So that's quite an interesting point there, that of course is lost in translation, because our translations all the time just say Jerusalem, Jerusalem, and you wouldn't pick up the fact that John is using a different form of the name, evidently because he saw significance in it, using a different form of the name in the Gospel and in the book of Revelation. You're looking back here again, the Jews from Jerusalem, they sent priests and Levites in order to ask him, Su tis'e, who are you? In English, we would probably prefer to say, to ask him who he was. But Hebrew style prefers to ask the question directly. They sent priests and Levites to ask him, who are you? They put the question in its direct and original form, whereas English would often make it into what's called an indirect question. They sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. So in translation we may prefer to change it to that way. Now of course they knew who he was. They knew that he was John, the son of Zechariah, who was their colleague as a priest. But the question of course has a deeper significance than that. Who are you in terms of who are you in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the prophetic progress of things. Just who are you? And they didn't want him to say, oh, I'm John, the son of Zechariah, because they knew that. So his answer shows that he knows exactly what they're saying. Kai homologesin, kai uk ernesato, kai homologesin, hati ego uk emi ho Christos. So notice again the sentence beginning with kai, and then this word means confess, homologesin. So the en ending here tells us that it's a past tense. And this word is made up of two parts, homo and logio. Well, let's write it out as it is. So homo means same, as in homosexual, and logesin means say. So if we look at this word in terms of its origin, it means say, same. But actually what it really means is confess, or probably in normal English we'd say admit. Now there's an important point here, because a lot of people, when they see the parts of a word, they say, aha, so this word really means same, say the same, he said the same. But it's important to realize that we don't find the real meaning of a word by chopping it up. We find the real meaning of a word by what it means in its context. So meaning is determined by usage. In terms of technical terminology, I would say meaning is determined by usage, not by etymology. You don't find the real meaning of a word by chopping it up into its original parts, because language is an alive thing and it moves on, and the meanings of words change as time goes on. So I just want to draw attention here to this very common mistake made by preachers and Christian writers, that we find the real meaning of the word when we chop it up. No, the real meaning of the word is found by the way it's used. It's determined by usage. And it's an interesting thing for us to note, and it perhaps helps us to remember and understand the word in a way. But we've got to be aware that the real meaning of a word is not what the different parts said, but the real meaning of a word is the way that it's used. Otherwise, we would have to say remove means move again, remove. But of course we know that remove means to take something away. It doesn't mean to move it again, even if perhaps originally that's what it meant. Its meaning is determined by the way that it's used in English, and remove just means to take something away. And it might be interesting if you're learning English to see, okay, it's got two parts there, it's got re and move, but what it really means is just to take something away. And the word take, of course, itself has lots of interesting ways that it's used that illustrate this. Take up, take on, take in, take off, all those words make an interesting study that show how the meaning of something can change from its original meaning, which you might think of when you look at the parts, but the meaning can drift, if you like, as it's used in the language. So anyway, here we have, and he admitted, and he did not deny it. We'd have to add it. He did not deny it. The Greek doesn't have the word it explicitly, but we'd have to add it in here. And he confessed. Here's an interesting aspect of John's style: positive, negative, and then positive again. Sometimes he likes to use the positive and negative, or the negative and the positive, but here he's got the three of them together. So this is quite a little bit emphatic here. He admitted, he didn't deny it, but he admitted. So here's the word kai. As I said, first approximation to kai is and, but it can also mean but. In some contexts we have to translate it as but, and I think this is an example. So that illustrates the point that I made at the beginning of this lesson, that kai, first approximation and, but other possible translations include but, and that's what we're going to use here. So with a fair bit of emphasis, he admitted it, and he did not deny, but he admitted it. That, here hoti just means that, ego, I, uk eimi ha Christos. Now the ego part is already included in the eimi, so eimi means am. So by itself it's sufficient, because it tells us that it's the first person, the ego, I. But when you're adding it, also using the separate pronoun here, it's putting a little bit of emphasis on it. I am not the Christ. So here he's addressing their real question. They simply asked him, who are you? But he's addressing their real question, which was, are you the Christ? And he says, I am not the Christ, ho Christos. Kai erotisan auton tiun su Elias kai lege uk emi, ho prophetes su kai apokryphe u. Okay, so we begin again with kai. We probably say, and so they asked him, ti. So this is what? Tiun. What then? Su Elias So this is a new letter for us. It looks like a capital H, but it's actually the capital form of this letter here. So don't be deceived by that. The fact that it looks like a capital H. The process by which it came to be used to represent a capital H in English is a little bit complicated, but in Greek it just represents a capital A. So this is Elias, which is the Greek form of Elijah. You, Elijah, are, and again this tells us that it's you, singular, and so this added here is a little bit extra. Perhaps not so much for emphasis here, but it's just the style, perhaps. Kai lege, and he says, here's an interesting thing, it jumps into present tense here. Everything previously was past tense. They asked him and he answered, but here we jump into present tense. Kai lege, and he says, uk eimi, not I am. So we do a similar sort of thing in English sometimes. We might be telling a story, and I walked down the road and a man came up to me and he says, who are you? So it's a technique that we also use in English, where we suddenly jump into the present, and you'll see the commentators say different things about it. A common thing that the older commentators would say was it just makes it a bit more vivid. And other people would say that it shows different stages in the process of this whole story. It highlights perhaps a change or a different, slightly different turn in the story. But another possibility, which I think is perhaps more true here, is that it's just a kind of a stylistic variation. And he says, uk eimi, ho prophetes esu, the prophet are you? And he answered, apekrithe. Again, this begins with, in normal form, it begins with APO, but the fact that the O is replaced by an air here tells us that this is past tense. Ooh. Notice how his answers are getting shorter and shorter, and curter and curter. He began with ego uk emi ha Christos, and then he said uk emi, and now he just says u. So he obviously doesn't have a great deal of time for these people. I mean, in a sense, he was Elijah, and Jesus calls him that later, but he denies it. I am not. Maybe because he thought that they had the wrong idea about what Elijah was going to do anyway. And then, are you the prophet? And he just says, no. So the prophet, what do we have here? Belief that Elijah would return to prepare the way for the Messiah is found in Malachi chapter 4 verse 5. So he denies being Elijah. Well, he wasn't a reincarnation of Elijah, but in a spiritual sense he was Elijah. And then they asked him if he was the prophet, and he just says no. So the prophet, you can find reference to that in Deuteronomy 18 verse 15, where Moses says that a prophet will come, God will raise up a prophet. So they're expecting a prophet at the end time. And so he denies being that as well. So moving on, epan unaltered tise hina apokrisin domin tois pemsasin hemas tileges perisiautu. So they said then to him. So this word then is similar to the English word then. It can have two meanings. It can just mean the next thing in time. He sat down then, he drank his cup of tea. Or it can mean kind of a logical thing. If you like tea, then you must be an Englishman. So it's kind of a logical thing. And so here perhaps it's a little bit of both. So then they said to him, hey, who are you? And by this stage they're perhaps getting a little bit impatient. And sometimes I think in translation we could add things like, well, come on. Who are you then? They're getting a bit impatient that he's just saying no, no, no. In the Urupif language in Vanuatu where we worked, we inserted a little word po, which shows that they're getting just a little bit impatient with this guy who's just denying everything. And that's equivalent in English to saying, well, come on, who are you? We have to give an answer to the ones who sent us, tois pemsasin hemas, to the ones who sent us. So apokrisin, you notice the similarity of that word to apekrithe, so that's a verb form, that's a noun form. Domin means we must give to the ones who sent us. What do you say? Peri meaning about, as in perimeter, going around, about the circle. Siautu, yourself. Siautu. Efe, ego phone pontos ente iremo euthunate ten hodon kuriou kathas epen Isaias ha prophetes. So this is a new word here, just efe which means he said. Ego phone. So here's an interesting one. He says, I'm just a voice. They asked him, they wanted to know, are you the Christ? Or are you Elijah? Or are you the prophet? And he says, nope, nope, nope. He said, I'm just a voice. I'm just a voice. Crying in the wilderness. Inte eremo. Euthunate ten hodon kuriou. Kathos epen Isaias ha prophetes. Straighten. So you means good, make it good. Thunate ton hodon, as an odometer, the way. An odometer measures the distance of the journey or the way. So here he's saying, straighten the way of the Lord. Kathos, as Epen said, Isaiah the prophet. So here again we have this capital H indicating the sound A. Esaias, ha prophetes. Isaiah the prophet. Kai apestalmenoi esan ekton Pharisaion. And they sent were ek from the Pharisaion, the Pharisees. Sent, they were from the Pharisees. So again, this is this word which the root form is apostello, and so the air in there again means that it's become a past tense. Kai 25 kai erotesan auton kai epan auto ti un baptizes esu uk e ho Christos ude Elias ude ho prophetes. And they asked him and said to him, T, so what, and in this case it means why. Why then do you baptize if you not are the Christ, nor, so this is not der, so not der, which we would translate nor, Elias, nor Elijah, nor the prophet. Apecrete autos ho Ioannes legon ego baptizo in hudati, mesos humon hesteken hon humes uk oidate. Apecrete, he answered them, John, saying, again this is typical Hebrew form, verb, he answered to them, John, saying. Very typical Hebrew form. The subject comes after the verb, and then who, the pronoun of who he answered to comes second, the subject comes third, and then the saying, legon, saying, introduces what he actually said. Ego baptizo in hudati. So their question was, why are you baptizing? Now, Jews recognized that new converts to their religion had to be baptized, but it was pretty scandalous and offensive, suggesting that they confirmed Jews from birth, and Jewish leaders would need to be baptized. They were not at all prepared to accept that. Maybe they might have accepted it from the hand of the Christ or Elijah or the prophet. At least they're kind of hinting at that, although in fact they didn't. But they're saying, so what authority do you have to be baptizing and to suggest that you're going to baptize us if you're not the Christ, nor Elijah, nor the prophet? So John answered, again, he doesn't directly answer their question, but he points to someone else. Ego baptizo in hudati. So hudati is water. I baptize in water. And this word in, from the influence of Hebrew, can mean in, like in water, right in it, or instrument. It can also mean the instrument. With the instrument of water, water is what I use. Mesos, humon, in the middle of you, hesteken, there stands, hon, and there's nothing in here to say someone, but in English we'd have to say someone, whom you do not know, Mesos, as in Mesopotamia, between the rivers, in the middle of the rivers. Ha opuso mu erchomenos, hu uk emi ego axios hin luso autu ton himanta tu hupodematos. The after me coming one, who, of whom, not I worthy, axios worthy, to loose, luso, is similar to the English word loose or untie, autu his, the strap of his sandal. Hupodematos. Interestingly, this word too has two parts. Hupo, meaning under, and dematos, meaning bound. So it's talking about something that's bound under your feet, or bound under, down at your feet. We have the two words here. I'll just write them down here, as in English, hypothermia, and this comes from hupo, meaning under, but we also have words like hyperactive, and this comes from huper, meaning over. So hyperactive means overactive, and hypothermia means underheated. So if you're suffering from hypothermia, your body heat is way down. And these come from, you can see a few changes have come in, but they come from these two Greek words, hupo meaning under, and huper meaning over. So this one is underbound, and that's a way of saying sandals, so the straps of her sandals. The rabbis said that a disciple should offer any service to his teacher which a slave did for his master, except that of unfastening his shoes. But here John is saying, pardon me, I'm not even worthy. So now we come to the last verse, verse 28. Tauta in Bethania egeneton, peran tu Jordanu, hopuein Ioannes baptizon. These things in Bethany egeneto happened, peran beyond to Jordanu, hopuein Ioannes baptizon. So this is the word Jordan, and you notice that the Greek word has an I here, Jordanu, and the J that we have was formed out of the I, and then in English, as in some other languages, it came to take the special J sound that we have, that languages like Greek and Hebrew don't have. So these things happened on the other side of the Jordan where John was baptizing. So very interesting interchange between John and the religious leaders from Jerusalem who came to ask about him, and his whole the whole thrust of what he's saying was not necessarily to answer the exact questions that they are asking, but to point to Jesus. And here he is saying that I rank so much below him that I'm not even worthy to do the most humble service for him, the most humble service, that of taking off his sandals.